Okay, everyone, we are going to dive right on in. Welcome and thank you all so much for sharing your time with us this afternoon. My name is Precious Miller and I am the coordinator of My Best with Michigan Center for Student Success at Michigan Community College Association, excuse me. I am so thrilled and excited about today's topic, that being trauma-informed advising. So, in planning this, none of us could have predicted what fall 2020 would look like. And so at the start of this pandemic, we had no idea. Some of us may still have a hazy view of the coming months. Our hope in today's presentation is that it would equip you all with tools that will support the work that you're doing and allow students a safe space to feel seen and valued and heard as they continue their education. We want students to feel empowered in our spaces and feel energized to become the awesome influencers that they are to positively impact their world. So thank you all for joining us today. So in Brene Brown's book, she shares this really impactful quote that reads, "The courage to be vulnerable is not about winning or losing. It's about the courage to show up when you can't predict or control the outcome." I really like this quote because it really summarizes what we're doing. We might not know the outcome or be able to control it or predict it, but what we can do is position ourselves to be prepared for what our students might be bringing to our spaces. So thank you all for making the choice to show up today and every day as we pursue the fight for student success. We are joined by Dr. Hammonds from North Carolina and North Carolina Student Success Center. This partnership felt like it was almost written in the stars, as we have an invested interest in providing quality and equitable care for the student experience. And so we are pleased to be joined and have this collaboration today. So here we have our agenda. Our agenda today includes welcome. I hope everyone feels welcomed in this virtual space. We're going to also review our goals for today so we're all on the same page as to what we hope to accomplish. We are going to receive an impactful presentation by Dr. Hammonds, followed by a Q&A. And we will also have the slides, the slide deck available. We're going to have a resources page at the end of this presentation that will direct you to get more information about Michigan Center for Student Success and North Carolina Student Success Center, along with where you can find the slide deck for today's presentation. So thank you, Dr. Hammonds. As we begin, I would like to give a round of applause to you as you have a powerful presentation to share with us today. Thank you so much for your attention to this work and sharing your knowledge with us. Thank you also for uniting us and offering ways to be courageously present for our students during the fall term and beyond. I am so honored to have the pleasure of introducing you this afternoon. Dr. Dominique Hammonds is an assistant professor in the Department of Human Development and Psychological Counseling at Appalachian State University in Boone, North Carolina. She earned her PhD in counseling from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte and her master's in clinical mental health counseling from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. She is a licensed clinical mental health counselor, qualified supervisor, national certified counselor, and board certified telemental health provider. She is the recipient of the 2017 Creativity, Innovation, and Counseling Award and the 2018 ACES Supervision Award. She is passionate about increasing mental health awareness among communities of color and increasing access to quality, culturally responsive mental health care in a global society. Her scholarship and professional service activities center around a variety of subjects, including culturally responsive teaching, counseling, and clinical supervision, creative teaching and supervision methods, technology, and counseling. Dr. Hammonds strongly values clinical work and maintains a private practice where she meets with individuals, couples, and clinical supervisees.
Do you need this?
Hey, Precious.
Hey,
Yeah.
Precious. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but there's a lot of background noise. So you may need to take a minute to mute everybody. I think you, as the host, have the opportunity to do that in your system tray. A lot of people.
Got it.
She muted me. I was still talking. That's okay.
Sorry.
That's what you're supposed to do. You guys can mute and unmute
Okay.
yourselves using the microphone, but that is so much
Okay.
better. Thank you. Please continue.
Okay. Yes. Thank you so much, Katie. So thank you again for your service and the opportunity to learn from you as we become better professionals with the information that you share with us today. So Dr. Hammonds, I will sharing my screen so that you can share yours and take it away.
Give me just a moment as I get my screen share set up for everyone. I think you should be seeing it. Is everyone seeing my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. I will go ahead and maximize everything. Okay, great. Thank you for introducing me and getting us started today. I am so excited about this opportunity to speak with both of these organizations. I believe in their mission and student services. So hopefully this next hour and a half will be an opportunity for learning, but a bit of virtual discussion as well. So without further ado, I will jump straight in. These are the goals that I'd like to touch on within our time today. I'd like to define trauma and its impact on individuals. I'd also like to identify strategies for how to cope with social and emotional needs for students, but also in the virtual space, because that's something that is probably a bit new to some of our experiences just due to COVID and everything else that we've been dealing with this really almost year. It feels like that. It feels like 20 years, but we'll get back to that. And then we'll define emotional bandwidth and its connection to student success, both inside and outside of the classroom. Okay. Oof. So usually if we were face to face, I would ask you to chime in, but if you have access to the chat or if you'd like to in some way share what you're thinking, but I want to know from you all, what are some of the challenges that you've run into in your work with students online in a post-COVID world? I bet you could probably, as I throw out that question, you could probably rattle down a list of 20 or so challenges that you've all experienced. Yes, and I see some things popping through already. I wonder if they're similar to some things that I've already included here, like lack of control, uncertainty, changing policies and procedures. I don't know about you all, but one of my primary roles is an assistant professor at Appalachian State University, and we get emails probably on a weekly basis with, here are the updates, here are the things that we now know, and how those new policy changes will need to be implemented. And then we'll get another one in the next week, and new policy changes, new implementation, which calls us to rework the things that we've just reworked. So that can be very stressful. I'd also guess that you're probably experiencing discomfort within the virtual environment. I know that we're all on this Zoom call today, but if we were to pre-COVID and post-COVID, just total the amount of Zoom hour time that you have spent using technology to facilitate what you do, it has probably skyrocketed exponentially since March of 2020, right? And so now we're having to adjust to what our work now looks like in these virtual spaces. Likely you're experiencing lack of knowledge of online pedagogies or virtual strategies, because for many of us, our primary mode of doing our work was face-to-face. And we really, really loved, I know I do, really, really love that in-person connection, just some of that felt sense that you get when you're in the same room with someone and you can vibe, right? I don't know, we'll call that a technical term for today, vibe, right? You can vibe off of someone. And then something that I've also heard from many staff members, faculty, is that there's a bit of a struggle between being task oriented and really staying on task, getting the job that you need to get done while attending to social and emotional needs. I imagine that the time investment that you've felt pulled to spend on building relationship has probably been more since in a post-COVID world. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we continue throughout the presentation. So were there any other things that I didn't mention that you've experienced as specific challenges of doing your work online? Okay. I don't see any coming through right now, so I'll take that as a good sign. Maybe my broad categories have been a bit of a catch-all. All right. Ooh, hold on a second. So let's just take a minute for a little bit of fun here. As you see on your screen, you have either seen these specific memes or some things like this floating around social media, either shared by people you know, your students, in some if you're in an online student groups. So this first one is Spider-Man, and Spider-Man's pointing at Spider-Man. And every single day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, every day feels the same. Right? Or this second one where we've got, it looks like a villain, and is that Batman? I don't know. I'm not someone please inform me. But this villain says, "Who are you?" And then, or the other person says, "Oh, the worst month of 2020. And the confusion is, well, what month are you talking about here? Because it feels like every month is just as stressful as the next. And then remember this guy, is this the OxyClean guy on, on the right? He says 2020 every single second, but wait, there's more, right? It really does feel like there's something new coming at us at every which way, every turn. Something new. And these things are things that none of us could have predicted or were likely very unprepared for post or pre-2020. Lastly, everyone probably knows this man, Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan relaxed. He's on the tour bus. Maybe he's preparing for a game. And he said, "All right, our plans." And this is MJ currently saying, in 2020, saying, "Really?" Really? This is how our students are feeling. Right? And as I can see a few faces, I see the faces really resonating with what I have on this screen. My guess is that not only are students feeling this way, but you likely are feeling this way as well. And then how do you, feeling this way, go into your work supporting students who, guess what, are also feeling this way? It's been a bit challenging. Yes? Okay. What is the impact on college students? So beyond the memes and the jokes and the things that circulate on social media, there's actually been one study that I'm thankful for. This actually was done in April of this year, of 2020, and it surveyed more than 2,000 college students. And as you can see here, there's some serious ramifications or impacts of all the experiences that have come with 2020. 91% of students report experiencing stress or anxiety. Let that sink in for a second. 91%. 81% of students report experiencing disappointment or sadness. 80% report loneliness or isolation. And that one kind of, all of these really make sense, but think about what's happened. So we had shutdown orders, we had people leave campus on many accounts. They went back to their home or an apartment, someplace where they maybe were isolated and taken outside of that student social environment, and perhaps put into a much smaller group or by themselves to kind of ride this out. Many students, 48%, said that they experienced financial setbacks. Yeah. Their jobs, whether that be on campus or off campus, were likely affected. And then relocation. I also mentioned a minute ago that perhaps students were asked to leave campus and then had to figure out what to do after that. That is a lot of change. That is a lot to deal with when, frankly, your primary task as a student is to learn and to grow, and then boom, here you are hit with all of these very real world, realistic challenges that you have no control over. I know in my own work with students, some of the challenges that I experience with them overall, even pre-COVID, has been around them understanding the experience of control. Sometimes they feel like they can control everything, but really we realize that that's an impossibility. And this was definitely an exercise in lack of control. Oof, we're gonna touch more on that. So as you can probably mention, all the things that I went over, the social media memes, the lack of control, the feeling like everything has changed and the rug has been pulled out from under people, it can contribute to, yes, stress, anxiety, depression, isolation, loneliness, but also trauma. Trauma, the word trauma derives from a Greek word meaning wound. And while the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the 5th edition, this is the most recent edition, defines trauma as a psychological response to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. I think it's interesting to note that while the DSM it references actual or threatened death, serious injury, sexual violence, it leaves out some other very important experiences like other stress or challenges that might not immediately lead to loss of life, like discrimination, divorce, job loss, like all these things that our students are really feeling and experiencing right now, right? So there's actually some scholarly debate going on right now referencing why all these things have been left out in the definition of trauma. But I can share with you some references if you'd like to research that on your own. I know that's not the focus of our presentation today, but let's work within the definition that has been put forth for this presentation. So I'll ask us, and I think obviously this is a hypothetical question, but can threats to sense of psychological safety still be considered traumatic? Yeah. Yes, coming from a licensed clinical mental health counselor, yes, absolutely. So let me just ask you, hypothetically, of course, and feel free in your own spaces to yell out at the computer screen, but can divorce be traumatic? Can job loss be traumatic? Can discrimination or racial injustice be traumatic? Yes. Can a pandemic when you are vicariously experiencing be traumatic? Yes. All right, so that's what we are going to go off of for the remainder of this presentation. And I do have it here. Uncertainty and threatened danger is traumatic. Let's take a step back, or I should say a pause here. What does it really mean to be trauma-informed? Trauma-informed treatment is a treatment or practice approach that assumes that an individual is more likely than not to have a history of trauma. Pause there for a second. More likely than not to have a history of trauma. If we go back to the things that I listed on the previous slide, job loss, divorce, racial injustice, those are things that many of us have experienced. And then you layer on that a pandemic, yes. But trauma-informed care recognizes the presence of trauma symptoms and acknowledges the role that trauma may play in an individual's life, including service staff. So not just your students' lives, but also your own. And why is that? It's because you, as the advisor, as the teacher, as the staff member, myself as the counselor, we are the tools. We use our skills to work with our students. So if we do not approach our work through a trauma-informed lens, we actually have the power to do a great deal of harm. And we do want to acknowledge those things. SAMHSA, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, this is a national organization. It says that there are 4 types of trauma responses, and those trauma responses are emotional, cognitive, behavioral, and physical. And I share these things with you for your own information's sake, for your own personal reflection, but also so that you can begin to recognize when some of those things might be happening, or some of your students might be experiencing those things in your own work with them. So I'll briefly touch on each of the 4 categories before we move on. Oof, okay. So an immediate emotional reaction. So we're starting with emotion here, and it breaks it down: immediate and delayed. When a person is displaying emotional traumatic reactions, you may notice these things: a numbness or a detachment. And what does that mean? It means that sometimes people, when they are faced with an enormous amount of stress, sometimes the best way for their psyche, their emotional sense of self, to deal with it is to say, I can't deal with it. It's to get space from it. And to a certain degree, that as a coping skill can be helpful, can actually be used as a productive coping skill. But taken too far on the other end, that level of detachment can be unhealthy. And it really depends for the person where they might be on that continuum, what their coping skills are, and how you know if that level of detachment is harming them or helping them. We'll talk about how to ask those types of questions. Anxiety and severe fear. So I think it's also important to notice that with what we've been dealing with the pandemic, with enormous amounts of uncertainty, stress, and strain, it's gonna be normal, right? And we do want to normalize these experiences. It is normal to have a healthy sense of worry, because there's actual threats that we're dealing with here. Perhaps getting sick, perhaps loss of life. That's something that we cannot pretend that there isn't that possibility in our interactions. So we don't want to say to a student, for example, it's okay. It may not be, right? We do want to acknowledge that. But severe fear may be something that is stopping them from engaging in their regular activities, and that may be something that is concerning. What about exhilaration as a result of surviving? Sometimes we experience survivor's guilt, and just an excitement because I'm still here, and maybe channeling that experience in a positive way. That's an immediate emotional response. Anger. Oh my goodness, right? Sometimes people are socialized to show anger first when they are experiencing uncertainty, stress, or trauma. And really what that could be covering up is a sense of helplessness, is a fear, is a loss of control, but it shows up in other ways. Depersonalization, and that's unreal, as though you're watching yourself. I don't know about you all, but I have had many thoughts since March where I think, are we in a movie right now? Am I living in I Am Legend or some disaster movie? And I flip through the television screen and I see all these images come across, and no, these aren't movies. This is news. And that is challenging. That is stressful. And as you can imagine, you probably have experienced some of these emotional reactions yourself. So imagine our students feeling these things, perhaps with even less coping skills to deal with them. Feeling out of control, denial or constriction of feeling, like, I don't know how to feel, so I'm just not gonna, whatever it is, feeling overwhelmed. And then there are those delayed emotional reactions, the things that might show up after numbing or not attending to our immediate emotional responses, like depression, mood swings, anxiety, grief, emotional detachment, or irritability. So these are some of the emotional reactions to just be just a bit more mindful of. And this one, I will keep moving for the sake of time because I'll ask you this question on each slide where I talk about these 4 things. On the last slide, I want to check in with you all. Cognitive reactions. Some of the immediate reactions that you might see in yourself or in your students. Difficulty concentrating. That one's a big one. You probably have felt like there are umpteen million things to do, and it feels like you can't seem to muster the focus, the level of focus that you had before to be able to attack all of these tasks. I'll be the first to raise my hand and say, oh, that's me, especially in the beginning. Around March or April, it felt I was just so exhausted and just doing the things that I would normally do, but now feeling like I just cannot muster the energy to do it. A rumination or racing thoughts, focusing on everything that's going on, a distortion of time and place. And this may happen in brief interactions where you might notice someone gets so wrapped up in their level of processing that you have to stop them and say, where are we right now? What are we talking about? Bring them back to our here and now place. And memory problems. Oh, goodness, me. If I were to ask people to raise hands, I would probably see lots of raised hands, right? So wait, what was I asked to do? What assignment was that? I know in that meeting I'm supposed to write down something and it floated off into space. Like, yes, those are immediate cognitive reactions to trauma, right? To extreme stress and uncertainty. And my guess is these 4 in particular could be important for our students, right? Difficulty concentrating, racing thoughts, memory problems. Oh my goodness. What about the delayed cognitive reactions? Intrusive memories or flashbacks? And now you're starting to see perhaps what you might typically think of when you think of perhaps PTSD, right? Intrusive memories, flashbacks, self-blame. And that could be feeling like, if only I could have done this or made a different choice or warned someone, if only I could have done this, then the outcome might be different, right? And that contributes to spiraling thoughts. And we have to catch ourselves when doing that because remember, we don't have as much control as I think we'd like to have around all these things. I know for me, like if I remember in Aladdin, if anybody's seen that movie, and the genie, he grants Aladdin 3 wishes, yes? And for most people, they wish for money or fame or something that might elevate them, give them flexibility or freedom. But many of us, if we're really true and honest with ourselves, we might say, you know what I want? I want to have the illusion of control. Or I want to be able to control the outcome of these situations because then that contributes to me decreasing my anxiety because I have more control. Yeah. What about difficulty making decisions? Oh my goodness. I know I am in this decision-making process now as a parent, trying to figure out what my life will be like once the fall comes with 2 little ones. I don't know, right? There are so many choices and not to go down that road, but because we're already having difficulty concentrating, because we're dealing with all the stress that has come with these experiences, it feels like you might be operating in a fog. And the next one I want to talk about is magical thinking. And that's the belief that certain behaviors, including avoidant behaviors, will protect you against future trauma. So if I just do this, if I could just control this or that, then I'll be okay. And the reality is we can't quite say that, but sometimes that helps protect our psyche and helps us feel like we've got more control. Lastly, this is a big one, and that's suicidal thinking. Sometimes our students may, in our conversations with them, or perhaps in their conversations with friends or other peers that you're hearing about, may mention thoughts of wanting to harm themselves. And these thoughts typically may come in ways that seem passive, like if I weren't here. That's something I hear often. Or, if I could just wake up and everything were the way that I wanted it to be. Or perhaps my family would be better off if they didn't have me as a burden. Right? Those are what we call passive, using passive language to describe suicidal thoughts, because they're not actively saying, I am going to harm myself at this time, this place, using this method. However, both can be concerning. And it's important to not gloss over thoughts like that, or statements, I should say, like that, either from yourself or from other people that you might interact with, and engage in whatever your university protocols are if you hear language like that. And we'll spend some time talking about how to gather that data later on in the presentation. All right, behavioral reactions. Immediately, because of all the trauma that may have been lurking under the surface or that's coming up because of everything we're experiencing now, a startle reaction, in that people may be more jumpy. When they hear loud noises, you may see flinches, or just notice yourself being more on edge. Right? Restlessness, feeling like, oh my goodness, I don't know what to do. I feel like I need to be doing something, but I don't know what it is. Your students, or even yourself, might experience sleep or appetite disturbances. And this could be either which way, as in sleeping more or sleeping less, eating more, eating less. But it's important to know what someone's baseline is to be able to identify if there have been disturbances. Argumentative behavior. And I'm sure you all know what that could look like, and you probably have experienced that from students. I know I have. But again, I think this goes back to the issue of control. In engaging with people, sometimes it feels like if I can just get you to see, if I can get you on board with where I am, if I can get you to see what I am seeing, then I'll feel, again, more control, and I feel like I am doing something to help manage this stress, anxiety, or trauma. An increase in use of alcohol, drugs, or tobacco, right? And that in itself can be concerning, because using substances as a coping mechanism is perhaps not healthy, but being able to just listen for those things can be helpful. And withdrawal or apathy. And that could be stepping away from relationships or activities that you were once heavily involved in, and getting to the point where you feel like, I just don't have the energy to put toward this or that. Lastly, delayed behavioral reactions, avoidance of event reminders. I have no focus here, can't do it. Social relationship disturbances, decreased activity levels, engagement in high-risk behaviors, and there are a number, it could be any number of things. Engagement or increased use of alcohol, drugs, or substances, and then withdrawal again. Last thing here, physical reactions. And these are things that you might really be able to pinpoint when listening to your students. So in those check-ins that you might do with them, how you doing, student? What's going on? Right? How have you really been feeling? Listen for these things: nausea or gastrointestinal distress. And of course, students might not say, hey, advisor, teacher, I'm experiencing gastrointestinal distress. What they might say is, I've just been feeling odd lately, icky, my stomach's been bubbly, those types of things. That's something to pay attention to. Sweating or shivering, a faintness, muscle tremors or shaking, elevated heartbeat, respiration, or blood pressure. Unlikely that our students are taking their own blood pressures, but they might notice a heart palpitation. Like, and this is something they've probably experienced before, perhaps before a big presentation, a test, something new that they've walked into. They may feel, just that flutter. Are they feeling that more? This is something you can ask them. Extreme fatigue or exhaustion. As I mentioned, March and April for me felt like that. It felt like I could not get enough sleep. And I bet you all or may have felt something very similar. And again, we go back to that greater startle response that comes from just feeling emotionally overwhelmed. Delayed physical reactions, sleep disturbances, nightmares. We say somatization, and that is our emotional experiences reflecting themselves in our body, right? Oh yeah. So remember I mentioned lack of control, anxiety, depression. Those things all come out. Our body and our mind are intricately connected. So although we may be able to ask our students how they are feeling and to give us a sense of their emotional reactivity or experience around what they may be going through, what they may be able to put a better finger on is how their body is feeling. So, and those can all be clues. Yes. So, all right, this is great. I'll keep it moving. So I want to go back to my little question here in the corner. How might these reactions show up in your work? Not just physical reactions, but let's think back to the cognitive, emotional, and behavioral. If someone would like to chime in, I know that you all have the power to unmute your mics, but I'd like to hear from maybe one or two people. How might some of these reactions show up in your work as advisors or teachers?
Hello, Dominique. This is Liz from Washtenaw Community College in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I think what we've seen are students who have just fled. They have just disappeared, which could kind of align with some of the reactions that you've indicated. They just don't want to participate and have just stopped engaging.
Thank you so much, Liz. I think that's a great one to mention. Students have just seemed to flee. They're gone. They are out of here. And perhaps it's not about them disconnecting in an intentional way where they're saying, I don't care about these things. I don't care about learning. I don't care about my coursework. I don't care about engaging with on-campus activities. I think it's important to understand that it could also be, I don't have the emotional energy. I don't have the physical ability to dedicate to all of these activities. And perhaps they are really trying to use their emotional capital to what they feel like is most salient to them right now. Perhaps that's caring about family members or friends, worrying about jobs or money, just getting access to good internet, for example. There are so many things that are probably, I won't say more important, but I will say more salient to them at this time. And it could feel overwhelming or just exhausting to get back to that stuff. Thank you, Liz. Anyone else?
Hi, I'm Shayna Curl. I work at Durham Tech in North Carolina. I've always experienced students not thoroughly reading every email I send them. That's nothing new. But it has gotten so much worse now that 99% of our communication is via email. And what I'm experiencing from my students is a high level of frustration on their end. And then additionally on the advisor's end, because I'm like, I've told you that. I have answered that question multiple times in multiple ways. So that's something that I'm experiencing and really seeing a lot with my students.
Oh my goodness, Shayna, thank you for that one. Absolutely. I think that could probably go back to the issue of memory or just feeling like You can't dedicate the mental space to it. Perhaps there are things that are right here, and I say right here, I do this all the time when I work in counseling, and what I mean by that is like salience, that are right here, and perhaps they are reading that email over and over again and still missing the details. And we do have to be sensitive to those things, and not shaming or not shaming our students for that reaction, because we've probably experienced that as well, having also gone through these things just alongside our students. I know, I know it can be tempting to use that classic line, right? Per my last email, or if you can say contained in the last email as a gotcha because you didn't read it. But remember, we are in different times right now. We want to be trauma informed when we are interacting with our students, not to shame them for perhaps forgetting or not attending to some of the details that might be listed in those messages. It might take a little bit more time on our end, but to take the time to go back and say, well, here it is. Here's an opportunity to go back and revisit the information that I've listed here. So thank you both for sharing just those couple of examples. And it sounds like these things really resonate with what you've experienced within your own work with your advisees. So then now what? Right? Knowing these things, oh goodness. It's important to be able to conceptualize how all of this matters. Why does it? Why are we talking about this? And you think about what is the impact of stress and trauma on our bodies, ourselves. So I'll go back to this as an example. You've probably seen this before. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Although Maslow was created, goodness, in the early 1940s or late 1940s. However, there have been updates and tweaks to this framework, but itself can be used as a theoretical tool to show the importance of these 5 really tasks within our own lives. And at the bottom, physiological needs like food, water, warmth, rest, it's at the bottom of the pyramid because it's supposed to represent that we need to satisfy those basic needs first before we can begin to safely or really dedicate the emotional space to some of the other needs. And then moving up at the top of the pyramid or near the top, we've got our safety needs like safety, security, just making sure we're okay. Belonging and love needs like intimate relationships and friendships. Esteem, like prestige and feeling a sense of accomplishment. And then self-actualization, achieving one's full potential, including creative activities. Again, the theory that Maslow put forth is that without satisfying some of the basic needs near the bottom of the pyramid, it will be more difficult. Not that you can't, but it will be more difficult to give the focus to, the time to, the memory to, the space to, all the things that we were talking about. Perhaps esteem or belonging or being creative. I don't know about you all, but when I'm hungry, it's pretty difficult. You've seen those Snickers commercials, right? and we've heard the word hangry. Yeah, when I'm hungry, I'm not really caring what you're thinking about me and me stopping to eat this snack or whatever it is. Or if I feel like I am so sleepy, I can't get in the space to be creative, to maybe attend to some of the details within emails or what my students are even asking me to do as an instructor or as a counselor. Ooh, right? So imagine what this might be for our students. We are here, especially near maybe March, April, where there was a lot of what is happening, those thoughts going on for us. And we seem to immediately revert back to these needs, safety, security, and our physiological needs, right? I know that probably the joke of 2020 is around toilet paper, right? How many people, when they started to feel like, oh my goodness, I don't have any control over what's going on. I need to make sure that I have all the things that myself or my family might need, toilet paper just fled from the shelves. And everyone thought, well, wait a second, why, if there is a pandemic, if there is a virus that's floating out there, why is toilet paper the thing that has disappeared from the shelves? And on my end, I thought, of course that makes sense, because it is one of those things that we can do for ourselves that helps us feel like we've got a sense of control, right? So if I've got this stockpile here at my home, right, then I don't need to go out. Then I don't need this. I don't need that. I have got control. I don't know what y'all are doing, but I got my stuff here, right? And that makes sense. I will reference a sense of control throughout this presentation because it really does impact how we think and feel. Right? So does this make sense? This idea that if we do not feel like we've got our basic needs satisfied, it's going to be more difficult to work up to the others. I'm seeing heads nod. Okay. So keeping all of that in mind, how have you personally been impacted? And this can be a reflection for you to think about hypothetically on your own, or if someone is brave enough to share, how have you been impacted? Thinking about lack of control, perhaps feeling like you've been sleeping more. Has anyone, does this resonate with anyone? I'm seeing heads nod. Is there one brave soul?
Hello, this is Tamara Walker. I'm at a community college in North Carolina. Hi, Dr. Hammonds.
Hi, Tamara.
I'll be brave and say I know for me, my patience level has diminished.
Oh yeah.
I feel like I'm taking on so much and trying to save the day for everyone, and putting on my cape that I've really picked up on a lot more triggers that I didn't know I had. Yes. And it's caused me to resort to find more coping skills in order to get through this, and to realize that I can't save everyone. And not only that, it's just I have to be okay with taking a time out so I can give my best. And my team has to be okay with that. So I'm finding like sometimes I'm not able to give my best because I got so much on me at the point.
Tamara, thank you so much for sharing that. I'd be willing to bet that there was a lot of heads nodding and that what you said resonated with so many people on this call today, that their patience has run thin. They don't have the emotional space or energy to deal sometimes with the stuff that people may, hurl at you. You're like, not today. I got my own stuff to deal with, right? And that's yes, that is a common experience. And I just want to normalize what you said, because we're all right there with you. And it does go back to some of the things that were listed on those slides, the immediate response to stress or trauma. And I have so many things to deal with that are on my plate right now that are salient to me, that you approaching me with the little stuff that maybe you could take care of, or that are outside of what I have the space to dedicate to right now, I just can't, right? Normal. Thank you so much for sharing. And I asked that question very intentionally. How have you been impacted? For all of you to really do some self-reflection and ask yourselves that, because it's absolutely relevant when we think about how we are approaching interactions with our students, right? So if you notice yourself more on edge, feeling triggered, feeling like you're exhausted and don't have the energy to really be in relationship with someone else, okay, that is important for you because self-care is needed. Remember, we are the tool. And if your tool, you can't function enough to give to others, that is a red flag. And that's something we want to be very, very mindful of. I'm going to ask another question of the group. So this is your turn. What's the secret to finding balance? Has anyone found it? I'm seeing faces. My guess,
Self-care.
self-care. Self-care, Katie. Okay. I heard self-care could be a secret to finding balance.
Setting good boundaries.
Ooh, good boundaries. Yes. So that could be saying no. Oh, yeah.
Having a hobby.
Hobbies. Okay. Anything else?
Just learning when to shut work off, working remotely. You have to be able to find that balance and actually shutting it off and saying, I'm not answering any more emails. I'm not answering phone calls. This is my time. This is family time. So there has to be a balance, because when you're working from home, your day, all the days are the same.
Yes. Yes.
If I could add, with that question about the secret to finding a balance. I'm sorry, I'm LaSonda Wells, Dr. LaSonda Wells from Kalamazoo Valley in Kalamazoo, Michigan. We do exist. I think the secret to finding balance is realizing that the way you find balance is the best way it fits for you. So one size does not fit all.
Yes. Yes. I would absolutely agree with everything that I'm hearing. So don't compare yourself to other people. LaShonda's version of self-care, or what they're doing to attend to themselves, is not going to be the same as what Liz or Katie or Camille or Susan or myself or Precious might even do, right? And that's a hard thing, to not compare yourselves to others. I also heard setting boundaries, and I intentionally add saying no, I cannot do that. No, I cannot get to that today. It will have to wait till Monday. That's important. Self-care and finding a hobby. These are all great suggestions. All right. I think I might hear another mic off. Does anyone want to jump in? Okay. All right. So let's roll with that. I heard lots of suggestions here when I asked the question, what's the secret to finding balance? But I will say, surprise, there is no balance. That's a trick question. Okay. So I just had to throw in a little bit of a trick question here, or perhaps maybe it's not a trick question, maybe it's a reframe. So I think the idea of balance sometimes is a little bit of a misnomer. It is something that at times can trick us into believing that we must have a sense of harmony in the things that we do. And I don't know if that's true, if it's ever possible. I have that illustration up with a woman juggling, because that's what I think it's more like. Instead of balance, think of your work life, your tasks, attending to yourself while attending to your students, more like juggling rather than finding a place where everything is in equal harmony. Because if anyone knows how to juggle, I'll be the first to say I really don't, but it looks really cool when I see other people do it. And I do get the basic idea of juggling, in that you have to intentionally take your hands off of one object or multiple objects while you're touching others in order to keep the whole thing going. And that's what I think is the important part, in that you will intentionally attend to this task or this task, your self-care or your work, advising or working with students, and then really attending to things that you need to take care of as a human, right? You'll choose when to do those things. And it's about being intentional and keeping all those balls in the air, not finding a unique balance where everything is equal, because that is impossible. Did I trick you? Does that make sense? The idea of juggling versus balance. I think I'm seeing some perhaps. Okay. So this is an important thing, because we are the tools, and we have to find ways for ourselves to be intentional, to allow ourselves to be able to say no, to be able to set those boundaries, to be able to find a hobby, and then, you know what, say, yeah, I see that there are a couple of things waiting in my inbox and it's Friday afternoon. perhaps what is salient for me right now is needing that emotional space. And is this something that is so important that I need to get to right now, or can that wait till Monday? Ooh, I know I said that. I'm talking to a group of, I'm talking to people as you're in your work groups, and you're probably thinking, ooh, that's taboo. Dr. Havens, why did you put that out there? But for ourselves, we do need to be intentional. How do we do that? How do we be more intentional? And I share with you my 3 R's. My first R is reflect. Reflect on your values. What's important to you right now? So these are questions you can ask yourself. What is your goal? What helps you feel connected? Right? And you can really think about what or who gives you a safe space to both get what you need. Can you find creative ways to meet your needs with the resources that you have right now? It's important, that part, that the resources that you have right now, because sometimes we can go spinning trying to get other things that we don't have. But in the moment, especially when there's an extreme stress or strain, or you're dealing with a student who comes to you and they're telling you a story and you're saying, oh my goodness, this person needs tools, right? It might be important first for them to reflect and say, what do I need? What is my goal right now? What's going to be helpful? Right? So stop first. Secondly, reorder. And that could be reordering your priorities, asking yourselves or your students, what do you want to invest your resources in? So remember, first is taking stock in what are my resources? And what I didn't actually touch on with that other bullet is our resources can be a number of things. I think typically we think of like money as a resource, but when we're talking about psychologically, personally, emotional bandwidth is a resource, energy, time, those are all resources that we need to be intentional about. So what do we want to invest them in? What's important right now? What do I need to be doing? Does your resource allocation match up with your values and your goals? So what is my goal right now? What do I have the space for? And what must you invest in and what's flexible? I want to hit pause on that one right there, because I think sometimes it causes us a great deal of anxiety or stress to feel like everything deserves the same amount of attention. And in reality, it doesn't. Right? We feel like we must do all things equally at 100%, and that's just not true. I know that's another like, ooh, did she really just say that moment? But yes, that is true, right? Lastly, release control. Ask yourselves the question, what can you actually control? And in reality, you can control things like your attitude, your behavior and actions, and your own resources. And once you know those things, you can then think more intentionally about what can you let go of. Perhaps all I have the emotional space for right now is to focus on these tasks. And then I will, as I get energy to go back to these others, as I fill my cup, as I get some self-care and I feel more rejuvenated, then I can do these other things, right? But reframing, I want to say before we move to the next slide, reframing is really the skill of taking a step back and examining our thoughts and our experiences through different lenses. And really, instead of getting stuck in trying to force things to go back to the way they were or the way that we want them to be, like instead of dwelling on lack or loss, it's important to try reframing, try learning to lean into the fact that things are not as we expected them and things will be a little different, and that these things just are. We can only control the things that are within our resources to control. Other people, the outside world, those things aren't within our control. We have to remind ourselves of that, but also our students. So these are my 3 R's. Uh-oh, okay. Warning, why is that relevant? Thinking about these things, the 3 R's, going back to lack of control and loss, it can feel like we're spinning ourselves in getting ourselves caught in what I like to call psychological quicksand. Meaning, our cognitions, our thoughts, the things that we tell ourselves on a day-to-day basis, perhaps within our consciousness or something that's we're not really aware that we're thinking, can lead to emotional responses. So cognition leads to emotion, and then that emotion then leads to behaviors. And then if we feel like we can't control them, we are engaging in the behaviors that are negative more and more, this cycle feeds itself. So these negative behaviors then contribute back to the cognitions that we're telling ourselves, and we're sinking ourselves further and further and further into psychological quicksand. So we have to figure out where to intervene there, catching ourselves in our thought process and realizing, okay, what can I control? What can I not control? What are my priorities? What are my values? And making it okay to do that. And that is part of the trauma-informed approach that I'll now talk about. What's your role? As teachers, as advisors, as staff members, studies continuously show that professionals without trauma-informed lenses may cause more damage to students that have experienced trauma. And if we go back to the foundational theory of this approach, is that we're assuming that many of our students have experienced trauma already. And then when you layer on COVID, we're dealing with a level of stress that they have likely not experienced to this degree before. So I really do want to be mindful of everything, all potential reactions, building relationships as we go into fall semester, as we continue, right? Research also says that close supportive relationships with faculty or advisors is essential to student success. You probably already knew that. I am preaching to the choir on this one. This is what you do. You know that your roles are very, very important to a student finding their way, to many outcomes, improved grades, feeling involved or like they embed in campus life. Research also says that students from underrepresented backgrounds who might lack supportive relationships with faculty members experience feelings of isolation and marginalization. So our roles are important in helping students feel involved. And then lastly, the last thing I want to share before I move on to our model here is relationally focused, culturally sensitive practice offers a way to help meet students' needs. We have to attend to the entire person. We cannot pretend that everyone's experience is the same, and it's important to get to know our students, who they are, what their backgrounds are, and what some of their value systems are in order to understand or really get a better sense of, because sometimes we can't understand, but we can get a sense of what might be important to them. Social support. We know that this is very important to student success as well. Social support has been broadly defined as emotional, informational, instrumental support services or resources. You offer all of that in your work. You are the tool. High amounts of social support has been associated with decreased symptoms of depression and anxiety in response to life stressors, and increased positive coping with better psychological adjustment to chronic health conditions or other stressors. Wow, right? Your role is important. I find this very interesting. I'll just touch on some of this and then move quickly, that individuals with low social support may be at greater risk of experiencing substance abuse problems, mental and physical illness, and suicidal ideation. Right? That's well-established literature. Individuals' perceptions of the availability, helpfulness, and adequacy of their support may have a greater impact on their psychological outcomes than the actual amount of support they receive. So it's really Do they feel like they're getting what they need? And that's where you came in. That's where you come in, right? You helping the student feel like they're getting what they need. What might these things mean for providing students with social support in these spaces? Anybody have a thought about that? My sense is that we're all on board. We know that it is important that you can assess or evaluate, learn more about students' relationships, both on and off campus. Do they feel like they can connect with an advisor, a faculty member? Can they reach out to someone if they're feeling like they need to touch base? Can they, in those conversations, maybe talk about their experiences around life events or stressors? Right? This is why we're here. And what's a framework on how to do that? Cultural relational counseling, therapy, there's actually a cultural relational teaching, but in general, the cultural relational framework helps us attend to relational awareness, mutual empathy, and authenticity within our relationships. And that is connecting, developing rapport, and really spending time doing so. Understanding the difference between empathy and sympathy when we're working with our students. So how do we display empathy while also maintaining good boundaries with them within our work? Because we know we're not their counselors, we're not their friends, but some of that stuff is bound to leak into our professional discussions with them. I know it has in my work with my advisees. I ask a student, well, what are your goals for the semester? And even in that, what seems like a very simple question, we still get, of course, we can't help but to, but we get stories about, well, I want to move because of a partner, or my dad is sick, and I need to make sure that I have classes on these days so I can drive my parent to the hospital or the doctor because they're in cancer treatment. Like, we're learning about them and what they need. So we do need to understand how to be empathetic toward our students and then connect in a genuine and authentic way. How do we do that? Step one is really establishing the relationship. My guess is that in the fall, some of you may have new advisees, new relationships that you're going to establish. And it will be important to make the first move in doing that, establishing the relationship, reaching out to your student, learning how to just jump in with them and setting the stage for what you want the relationship to look like, whether that's a good introduction, and that could be virtually using all the resources, the technology that we have. There are a number of ways to establish and maintain that relationship on an ongoing basis. Stage two would be increasing relational awareness, learning about the student, your advisee. Remember in the example that I just gave you about how even a simple question like, what are your goals for the semester? We'll get stories about, we'll learn about that person, and we don't want to shy away from those discussions, but rather we want to make more space for doing that so we can truly connect with them and learn to, I'll say, give ourselves room to understand perhaps if your student might be displaying some of those immediate or delayed reactions to trauma, but how would you do that if you don't know them? I know it's tough because you might have more than a handful of advisees. You may have many advisees, and oh my goodness, how do you do that with 20 students across the semester, 30 students, 40 students, more than that? And it will be difficult. I'd like to hear later on some thoughts about that. And then lastly, in stage three, reflection, evaluation, and application of our relational knowledge. So given all the things that we know about that student, their specific challenges, their unique circumstances, their cultural heritage and backgrounds, what can I do within my role to connect them to the resources that they need, the resources that may be on campus, and then if there aren't any on campus, how can I point them in a direction that is helpful even off campus. Right? So there's so many things that we can do, but it's important to treat, evaluate, assess, talk to the entire person. And I'm realizing we are running low on time, so I'm going to speed up here a bit. And I gave us room for a check-in. What is the importance of supportive, growth-promoting relationships in your work? I bet we're all on the same page here. It goes back to that literature that I shared with you, in that you have to know the student. You have to be a safe, or rather brave space, so someone can come in and say, here's me, here's what I need in your role. So I'll move us along. Identifying student social emotional needs. Interestingly, so there are studies that point to personality factors that might give us some information about what the student may experience or what they may need in the moment. Personality factors that contribute to depressive symptoms and anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, meaning that they may feel like it's difficult to latch on to an advisor or supportive person, or they may feel like the opposite of that. I'm just gonna like separate or distance myself from you because of this amount of stress. Perceived stress, if they feel like there's a high amount of stress, then they're a little more likely to feel sadness or depression. Right, so these are things to just be mindful of. I'll move quickly because there's a couple things I'll note here on the next slide, but I want to get to some of the suggestions because that's really what you want to walk away with today. Personality factors that guard against depression tend to be number of friends, extroversion, conscientiousness, and agreeableness. Some of these things you may have guessed. Okay. Personality factors contributing to anxiety symptoms. Here we go with anxious or avoidant attachment, perceived stress, openness. And personality factors that protect against anxiety symptoms, extroversion, conscientiousness, and agreeableness. There are a few that you see showing up on both slides there, and those will be things to just be aware of in your work with your students. But wait, there's more, right? Of course, right? There's always more. Can we go back to the ShamWow guy? Really, the discrepancy between needed and received emotional support actually contributes more to these symptoms than does personality traits. So does a student feel like they're getting what they need? And how would you be able to assess that other than getting to know them, learning what they need, and also connecting how getting what they need registers. So sometimes it's hard to express to someone, I need direct feedback. I need reach outs. I need, like, these are things that a very reflective person can do, but our students may not be able to say, in order for me to be my best this semester, I need this to pull me out to, like, so it can be important to have those discussions and use examples with students to normalize what they may be experiencing. Because sometimes it's hard for them to come out of the blue and say, yeah, I need you to, in our conversations, I need direct feedback. That's a very self-aware statement, but you can list those things. Say, sometimes in my interaction with students, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. And then they can pull from a range of behaviors or ways of interacting that may be helpful to them. Okay. All right. It's important to also touch on mental health first aid, because what happens if you are in a conversation with one of your advisees or your students, and then they mention something that feels very important, something that worries you, you're worried about them and their emotional, but also physical safety. And mental health first aid has a 5-step action plan, and what it helps us really in the moment assess what the student needs and the risk. That would be the first step. listen non-judgmentally as they're describing their experience or what their thoughts are. So sometimes I think the immediate response can be, no, don't feel that, don't think that. That's actually stigmatizing. Instead, what we want to do is get as much information as possible first. Here's what I'm hearing. I'm listening before responding. Give reassurance and information to that student, right? Perhaps that may be a place to go on campus, a connection to psychological services, being able to make a call directly to them. I'm sure that on your individual campuses, you might have specific policies and procedures for if this comes up while you're talking with the student or you have a concern about them. But I urge you, especially now, given the amount of stress and likely trauma that our students have experienced over the past several months, to refresh yourselves of whatever those policies and procedures might be. And then lastly, encourage self-help or other supportive strategies. And those things, I urge you to connect with your psychological services to get some maybe handouts or resources that you could give students in the moment, even if you're not in person, but perhaps you have a file saved on your desktop and you say, you know what, this might be helpful for you. Hang on the Zoom call and I will make a direct call to psychological services with you. Imagine if someone could do that, the amount of support that they might feel, your students might feel. Okay, so these are the steps outlined. I won't touch on them in great detail because I listed a bunch of detail there for you because I knew that you'd have this PowerPoint, and it goes through all the steps and what you can do, step 1 through step 5, because I want to get to the suggestions. Yes, step 1, assess for risk and suicide or harm. Listen non-judgmentally. Yes, give reassurance and information. Encourage appropriate professional help. And encourage self-help and other support strategies. Now, here we go. I really want to touch on these. What are the challenges of supporting students' social and emotional needs virtually? I bet you felt like over the past almost hour and a half that I have thrown so much at you. So how am I going to ask you to, in the moment with the student, do all of that and online, right? When there feels like there is more of a barrier. Right? Sometimes there are challenges like lack of visual cues. I will say I can see a couple of people, even in our Zoom call today, that have their cameras on, but sometimes in these large meetings, many people turn their cameras off and they put up their headshots. You know, that's part of Zoom culture. But unfortunately, what that also does, it means that I can't feed off the audience. It means that I am able to, or it's more difficult for me to pull from you and see nodding heads or resonance or even hesitance about something that I've said. And it's the same in your work. Yes. So lack of visual cues, dulling of that felt sense. When I am in person with someone, I can feel, remember that word vibe that I'm saying today is going to be a scientific word. I can feel their vibe, and I can feel when there's hesitance. I can feel when they need reassurance. I can feel that there may be something off and perhaps I need to pull to get them to give space for them to share more of what they might need. It's more difficult to do that in virtual spaces. And sometimes you just lose the ability for casual connection. I love being on campus and having my door open. And then a student can just walk by, poke their head in. They don't even really need anything, but hey, Dr. H. And I get these casual connections from students. How are you? You're doing great. All right. See you next week, or I'll see you sometime around the halls. And it's those types of connections that are actually really important. And I'm realizing that as we have been working away from campus these past several months, in that those type of casual incidental reach outs are the spaces where I learn more about my students than making an appointment and then coming to my office to sit down and we have this very task-oriented thing. But there are really challenges that we need to overcome here. How would we do that? How would we continue to build relationships in virtual spaces? First, one suggestion is to attend to camera placement. That could be very important. I know that in my work in particular as a counselor, sometimes my clients show up and they've got the camera set here where I can barely see maybe the top of their face. Like, okay, I can't see the top of your face, but what I really need is part of your body. I need, what about here up? So I can get more of that body language. I can gauge what your experience is more so than if I only saw a piece of you, or if your camera were off, for example. So those are something that you could even pull into your conversations with your students. I know that when I take on new GAs, or in my contract, for example, I have a GA contract, yes, I know, I will mention things like that, and I'll just set the stage for what I would like to see happen, what I think helps create the best working environment for us. So I say, we're gonna meet weekly, or however it is, or in our work, we'll attend to personal check-ins, but also people check-ins. And we're going to spend some time just being with one another before we jump into the actual work of what we're here for. And that's our next bullet. People and project check-ins. Rapport building, especially right now, is much more important. Please don't make the mistake of just running past that, because it's in those moments where we get to check in with the students that they may feel more comfortable to give us information about what their actual experience is. Use voice descriptors. When working online in particular, sometimes we miss those visual cues. We feel as though it can be difficult to replicate a face-to-face relationship, and using voice descriptors can help that. And what do I mean by that? I mean, if I'm talking with someone and I hear, I'm picking up on an increase in tone. You might raise your tone or lower their tone. If I hear slowing down for a moment while they're talking about a specific topic, I'm going to bring that to their attention. I noticed that you slowed down a bit as you talked about driving your father to the doctor. What might that mean? Or tell me a bit about your experience around that. Bringing those things to the surface helps make connections and tie everything in. And then keeping flexible expectations. One of the things that I noticed in my experience that working with students earlier this spring is that students really felt like they needed the space to just wrap their arms around everything that they were dealing with. And so I started to notice students meeting with me with their computers laying down on their bed, for example, or in more public spaces like cars, or in the kitchen where there are children running around. And, you know, given everything that this time is bringing for us, it's important not to shame or stigmatize where someone might be with that. And instead, maybe bring that into the discussion to normalize or allow space for discussion about that would be more important. Quick tips for virtual trauma-informed teaching and advising. Be observant and cognizant of your students' behaviors. Right? I think we have been talking about that through this entire presentation, learning what can we just pick up on? What can we notice? And what might that mean for what we'll need to do in our role as advisors or teachers? Attune to body language. Perhaps you may be hearing about students leaving class, even virtually, just popping out, right? Or in some way checking out, even if it's emotionally, from sensitive discussions early. You may notice more absences being reported or meeting cancellations. Those are all things to pay attention to. I would recommend initiating connection, whether that's by email, phone call, virtual office hours. Remember that the research says that perceived support is greater than or more important than the support that they actually get. So I hate to say that, but it is. They want to know that you are there if they should choose to reach for it, rather than feeling like you're not there and they're having to search and find and figure out how to get what they need. It's much better if they can just say, oh, okay, Dr. So-and-so, Miss, my advisor, they sent me this email. I can just go back to it. I know they sent it to me a couple days ago. It's there. Fall back or be sensitive to environment. Just making more space and understanding for where they might be in their lives and them trying to fold in your meetings, their classwork with you. Fall back on the relationship. It's so important. Don't underestimate the importance of that. Build it, maintain it, do what you can. For example, I shared some of those memes with you all. That's a simple way of building rapport and relationship and just being able to connect on a human, like two humans together, and minimizing potential power differential or perceived power differentials within your relationships. Like, we're all in this together. What do you feel about this? You know, just bringing that type of conversation to light and creatively utilize technology. I would say instead of struggling to recreate face-to-face teaching or advising, instead consider opportunities for innovation that virtual spaces may offer, right? It feels like trying to put a square peg in a round hole when we're saying, okay, how do we do this online? If we're trying to only go back to what we knew about what we've done before. Newsflash, everyone, this is not like what we've done before. So how can we, with the resources that we have, with the technology, with the space that we have, do what we need to do? That makes space for more empathy, for less anxiety, less depression, less stress, because we're all stressed. We're all dealing with the same things here. Although we each have our unique experiences, but we want to approach this as people and not forget that we're in this and dealing with these things together. I want to just touch on one last thing, and that was creatively utilizing technology. It might be allowing for or creating a digital meeting space where students can pop in and meet with you for virtual office hours, things like that. Like, how can you be creative about what you have? That could be important. I know we're running out of time here. Last slide that I want to touch on, and it's our tool belt. How can we use the things that we may have already just within our person to build that connection? Active listening, perhaps, would be a step one in sitting with someone, whether that's virtually or not, and hearing before reacting. That's what active listening is, and taking all that information. Immediacy, that's hearing what someone is saying and in the moment saying, you know what, I just want to touch on that because it feels important. That shows someone you're listening, you're with them, you were there. Same thing with reflection. The skill of reflecting can be used with emotions, content, or meaning. Something that I find myself doing in my work as a teacher or as a counselor is reflecting content and emotion often. Like, I get the sense that you may be feeling X, Y, or Z, and you throw in your emotion word, right? That's normalizing. That is, again, showing the student that you're really hearing them. Normalization. When I heard from several people when they shared their experiences, we said, I bet that many of us are also feeling the same thing, right? Just bringing that to light so they don't feel like they're out there on a limb by themselves, the only person feeling stress around this, and they're likely not. Self-disclosure. That's the last thing I'll say around humanizing yourself as you begin to tackle all these tasks. Connecting on that human level and being able to share, just like I have done in brief spots throughout this presentation. I'm a human. You know a little bit more about me. You've heard a bit about my own experiences of just 2020. And I know as a counselor, as an advisor, as a teacher, that being able to connect to a human helps create that space, helps someone feel more comfortable with you. So just remember to humanize yourself in all of these reactions, and that will help all the other things happen. So I know that, wow, there are so many things that I touched on within this presentation and this conversation, but I would be more than happy to, in the future, share resources or go more into depth with what I've shared. I just think it is such an important conversation to have. And hopefully what I've done is just give you something to think about as you begin to process what the fall will look like, potentially working online or advising your students. But I just want to thank everyone for allowing me the space to come and share some of these things with you. At this point, I will yield to the host so that they can take the conversation where they'd like to take it. I can stick around for further questions if we have time, but I'm not sure if I've reached the end of my time today.
Dr. Hammonds, thank you so much. This has been such an impactful conversation, and I just am thrilled and honored to have been a part of the talk today. If there are any thoughts or considerations, you can feel free to email them to myself. I can put my email in the chat, or I can connect you with Dr. Hammonds. Is that okay if people connect with you offline via email?
Absolutely, I welcome it.
Okay, so I am going to send out the recording and the slide deck to all participants who have registered once the recording is available. That will probably be early next week that the recording will be available. We have a website as well that I will share out with you all in case you want to attend or find the reviewing that way. So thank you guys for your time, and it has been such a pleasure to have all of you here today, and I wish you the very best in the rest of your workday. Thank you.